Aloha, welcome to the show. My name is Ann Kealakele, and I'm in the studio this afternoon with Kaleikoa Kaeo. Aloha.
Aloha. Velina me ke aloha.
So glad that you're here. It's nice to have you in town because
On the visit for the day.
It's a rare event to have you stop by the studio, but what were you in town for today?
Well, today I came to provide support, stand in unity with Professor Williamson B.C. Chang from the University of Hawaii Law School, along with Dr. Keanu Sai and others like-minded and like-committed Kanaka who joined in to support Professor Chang in his filing towards the, well, I guess both would be to the federal government and eventually the state of Hawaii.
Wait, what did he file?
He filed I don't want to get too technical about everything, but he filed basically, how would I put this into to ask, well, to actually filed a complaint. So under the federal law, if you...
Or a report, rather.
If you're right, if you know there's basically a crime being committed, especially a felony being committed, and the felony, in fact, as stated by Dr. Keanu Sai and Professor Chang, if you looked at Hawaii and to understand the condition of Hawaiians in Hawaii, if we are an occupied nation state, and therefore many of us who are also state employees, as myself, a professor at the University of Hawaii, what does that mean in regards from the federal government as we file this report, asking them to investigate, I guess, first of all, and research whether or not we are compliant in regards to international law as an occupied nation state, and or if there is no complaint or there is no reason for the complaint. And so it's a very simple process. You're basically asking the feds to take this report and to investigate the issue of whether or not Hawaii is an occupied nation state, one, and two, whether or not our political status, our nationality as Hawaiian citizens of the Hawaiian Kingdom, or our political status as a people have ever been extinguished legally and lawfully under international law.
But he wrote a letter specifically to the Attorney General, Eric Holder.
Right.
Whereas like Kamana Opono Crab's letter went to the Secretary
of State. Yeah.
So this one went to the Attorney General.
Right.
And you signed on to this letter.
So, my understanding, of course, is that under U.S. federal law, it is incumbent on all of us, in fact, to report, especially when a felony is being committed, especially a war crime. And so it's not really our job, per se, to prove whether or not a war crime is being committed. It's really our job to report it. And therefore, Eric Holder, his response should be an investigation, first of all. And
to see if it's true.
Correct. And so in the investigation, obviously, he would have to gather evidence. And so it's our hope, of course, is that in the gathering of evidence, it will be clearly revealed that the United States, in fact, has an illegal presence in these Hawaiian Islands. And in fact, as one of the charges of pillaging has been going on for far too long in these islands. And so we, especially the Kanaka Maoli, or the so-called Hawaiian subject citizens of the Hawaiian Kingdom, have been victims of this particular crime, of pillaging of the United States upon our lands and resources.
Let's explain to people what pillaging is, because pillaging, like when I hear pillaging, I think of like a movie, and I sort of think of like maybe what we were talking about earlier, like Braveheart or some movie where people are being violated by this foreign power, right? Yeah. So in what way is this manifesting?
Well, first of all, so pillaging and looting, as I understand, are pretty much the same kind of basic idea, where you have a foreign entity going into a foreign soil. So, of course, the United States as a foreign country coming into the Hawaiian Kingdom, or the territory of the Hawaiian Kingdom, at what point, when does the United States have legal standing to come into the territory of the Hawaiian Kingdom to begin the process of whether it's taxation, whether it's the removal of resources, whether it's the forced taking of lands and resources and so forth, the bringing of the U.S. military onto our lands. And so the question, of course, again, going to to Mr. Holder, Eric Holder, would be for him to simply, as I say, it's a very simple process if you think about it. Obviously, if they have evidence that the United States actually has legal rights to be in the Hawaiian Islands, not occupation, but actually somehow in some document or some treaty or in some kind of process legally acquired the territory of Hawaii and also acquired the so-called citizens of the Hawaiian Kingdom to become United States citizens. Now, the usual process is through a treaty of cession or a treaty of annexation in which the Hawaiian Kingdom, or people of Hawaii, would give their consent to be taken or to be brought under the jurisdiction of the United States. Of course, our contention, and it's pretty clear when you look at the evidence, there is no such document that actually exists. We do know there were failed attempts at annexing the Hawaiian Islands.
Illegally
in 1893 and in 1898.
Right.
So although you might go on Wikipedia and you might look up the so-called annexation of Hawaii, and you might find it happened in 1898, you might look up the Wikipedia and look at, and it might show you a link to something called the New Lands Resolution. Well, anyone who has done any kind of research or any kind of understanding legally of what a resolution has or the powers of the resolution, you realize a resolution only has power within the territory of that so-called nation state. So, and a United States resolution only has power within the territory of the United States. The question, of course, then begins, well, when does a U.S. resolution have effects in a foreign country like the Hawaiian Kingdom? And in fact, if you, again, by looking at the evidence, you clearly see it doesn't. And therefore, what exact mechanism, what legal document, what treaty is the United States of America using or claims to use or argues it has, which can be brought forward as evidence to demonstrate that somehow they have acquired
and can
Hawaii
tax people.
See, I think it's pretty clear that they don't.
Here's the thing, though. Okay, so the letter from Kamana Opono Crab
Right.
went to the Secretary of State,
Correct.
and this one went to the Attorney General. That other letter hasn't been acknowledged by the
Correct,
State
yeah.
Department. And instead, they took off their little narrative that used to be on their website about the annexation,
Right.
quote unquote, of Hawaii. They took it off their site.
Right.
And luckily, some people had a copy of what used to be there, which in my opinion, if people read it, and I think it's on hawaiiankingdom.org,
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah.
The story that they had up there was kind of a confession. Part of it was read like a confession of them just taking Hawaii. It was
Right.
just like this
Yeah.
flagrant sort of, we wanted it and so we took it. And
Yeah.
now there's nothing there,
Correct.
right? So the State Department ignored that letter. What do you think would happen if the Attorney General's office tries to ignore this report, basically, that a senior law professor from the University of Hawaii filed? What do you think that might mean?
I mean, I think the silence is, the way I look at it again, their silence really is their explanation, which is they don't have one. And for me, for myself personally, I'm not so concerned about their reaction because we don't really have control over the reaction of the United States. I'm more concerned about the reaction of our people. See, when I look at what happened today, I see it more as empowering of our people's consciousness and understanding that, in fact, it's not a rumor that the United States doesn't have jurisdiction over Hawaii. They may have the power of the gun, they may have power over us, but it doesn't mean they have legal authority over us. Those are two separate things. I think people get that confused, that just because someone has bigger guns over us, somehow they've acquired us legally.
Our agreement.
Correct.
Right.
I think what's important for our people is that we no longer can sit quietly by and pretend to look at this kind of fabricated history or accept this kind of illusion or facade that Hawaiians somehow gave consent to the taking of our citizenship or gave consent to the actual military occupation of these islands. And so for me, my personal involvement in this particular issue is one where I see it as being a much more relevant to our people's conscious raising. Because now our people will look at this situation and say, okay, whether it's the U.S. State Department, Eric Holder out there, okay, what is your evidence to,
Right.
we just laid down the challenge, right? We're saying, here it is. We have evidence that supports you don't have that title over us. Therefore, this could quickly be ended, very simply, if you are able to produce on your side those particular documents. Now, unfortunately for them, unfortunately for us who are involved in the situation, and I think those people who will be becoming more and more involved in the situation, we realize that it has been an illusion. It has been a fabrication. It has been
like
a
mass
legal
hypnosis.
Correct. And therefore, our people are, and I would say slowly awakening. But I think what you see going on in the community, I think what you saw recently in the Department of Interior hearings, which is the first hearings we've had in over, I think since 1999, throughout the islands, that actually went around to try to collect information from our people directly from the federal government.
Yeah, but really, why were they doing it though? What was the motivation for it?
So, with respect to 1999, the idea, even in 1999, that was to set up the Akaka Bill. And so, yeah, the Department of Justice, I think, and the Department of Interior came to Hawaii to go around the islands to collect this testimony with the idea of reconciliation between the Hawaiians and the United States government. Hawaiians came out en masse and said, wait, if we're talking reconciliation, let's start with the truth first. First of all, which is then, of course, where do you have this jurisdiction over our people? They got smashed. But yet, the Akaka Bill still came out of Washington, D.C. without our people's consent and voice.
And then 15 years later.
15 years later, it happens again. Except in this situation, 15 years have passed, and a lot more people are educated about this issue. Not just Native Hawaiians, but many people who also live in Hawaii and understand the history, understand, in fact, that it's been this idea that somehow, the overthrow occurred, Hawaiians cried for a little while, and then the Queen said, oh, shucks, we give up, and then we somehow legally consented to the... Right. We know none of that history, in fact, is true. In fact, it's all manufactured. And as Noam Chomsky said, right, why is it manufactured? Manufactured consent is to create the illusion somehow that we buy into the taking of our people and our lands.
Well, it's funny you should name Noam Chomsky of all people, because I had some communications with him and he thinks we're just a colonized people.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was like, it's painful. We were talking earlier about the liberal left.
Yeah.
And how even talking to somebody that's as liberal or as so-called radical as Noam Chomsky, he can't take this narrative, the truth of our story.
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, part of it is, I would suggest that he probably doesn't know the whole history. That's the first.
He doesn't even want to know it.
And that's the second I was going to say. The first, he doesn't know. The second, it would be, does he really want to know?
No,
because in his knowing, does it also implicate his own position of privilege?
It challenges his position.
And so that's something we deal with every day in Hawaii. Of course, there is a, because of the privilege of those who have benefited greatly economically over our disempowerment.
For generations.
Over the erasure of our consciousness. I mean, I think Ngugi, had it said best basically when he talks about the cultural bomb, and he has that line towards the end when he says, theft is holy, which is to me which is this idea that we have been taught that somehow what occurred in Hawaii was somehow almost like godly and holy, and somehow it was inevitable, and somehow
that's the narrative.
Good, and it's great for you guys. You're lucky.
You're lucky. Better
Correct.
Us than Japan.
But
that's the
obviously,
kind of attitude.
That's not what they taught 120 years ago. That narrative is something that went along with our consciousness as we became more distant from our culture, more distant from our language, more distant from the control of our educational system, more inundated by those who came to Hawaii to capitalize on the situation to make,
like
for their
capitalism
fortunes.
itself.
Correct. They, the more our people's voices and understanding was disempowered, and more theirs empowered. But fortunately, as they say, truth is a very powerful thing. Education is a very powerful thing. We are at a time when our people are not so much waking up, I think, to the truth, but I think feel free enough to have conversations about the truth. I think when you saw the DOI hearings, where at one time, when people use the word, for example, occupation, or they talked about sovereignty, it came from a perspective, I think, where most people were not fully educated and really understanding what those things actually meant. See, today is a very different day.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I also think there's a kind of necessity I think that everything's been so ramped up in terms of the desecrations. There's 1 million plus more people here. I mean, the changes the past 20 years are totally off the charts. How do you even measure that kind of, we're being erased like right in front of our face. So I think part of what I was witnessing anyway with the DOI hearings isn't just a consciousness, it's a need to step up and make ourselves known.
I totally agree. I think if you talk, a lot of, Hawaiians, our generation, maybe even younger, they know. I mean, when you talk to them, they know. As an educator myself, they know. If we don't do something very soon, in this generation or the next generation, that might be the end to this idea of this free-thinking Hawaiian. That's a sad thing to say, but I always say this. When I talk about Hawaiian language and Hawaiian language revitalization and education, I'm thoroughly involved in the Hawaiian language revitalization and Hawaiian education movement. And when people talk about Hawaiian language, you see, I think most people don't realize Hawaiian language is on its deathbed.
Still yet?
It still is deathbed.
Okay.
But people get this, we have some Hawaiians talking some Hawaiian here, some Hawaiians talking there. But my point is, we may have some people making Hawaiian sounds, you see. Whether or not that's consciously thinking Hawaiian, that's a very different, very different measure. But as someone who's deeply involved with this, I wish I could say we had a huge movement of people pushing for Hawaiian education, pushing for Hawaiian language education. But the sad fact is we don't. That's a fact to this day. I think if you look at the numbers, something like less than, between 1% and 2% of all children in schools are in Hawaiian language immersion programs.
And that's actually an improvement?
That's 1% to 2% though.
But that's how desperate the situation was.
But think about that. You're talking 1% or 2%.
It's still on life support.
It's very much on life support.
I mean, I remember having a conversation with you and Kahele years ago, and I asked you how many other families you know of who are speaking Olelo Hawaii at home. And you at that time, I think, said like 4?
There was, in Maui, there's only a few that I know of where the whole family would use. And I would say now, there might be a little more now, but not enough. Not enough. So for me, I look at issues like Hawaiian language, and I don't separate issues Hawaiian language with issues over our political status, with issues whatever we did today. And to me, these are all part of as we say in Hawaiian, ho'omau, enduring, keep on keeping on, whatever this is to be kanaka, whatever it is, this root to be kanaka. I would clearly argue, without our language, without an understanding of our language, we will have a shortcoming in understanding our cultural philosophies. And without our cultural philosophies, what does it mean then to be a Hawaiian politically?
Yeah, what is Hawaiian consciousness?
I cannot separate the difference. When I hear times, I'm a cultural Hawaiian, I'm a political. See, for me, there's no difference, because you cannot be someone involved. And the example I give, I'll take, maybe you're raising taro, kalo farmer. There's no way you can be a taro farmer today, and you know everything about growing kalo, all the cultural knowledge in growing nice, healthy taro, and not be involved politically. Because you might not have water, you might not have healthy soil. So you realize if you're going to be a taro farmer, you got to be involved politically to maintain
the fight for the
that
land.
fight for the land.
You have to.
On the other hand, it works the same way. I may have the political power to get the land and water, but if I've never experienced or I've never promoted or been involved in the raising of kalo or taro, that's also a shortcoming. So when I look at that situation, to me, what tells you the most powerful we can be, of course, is to be the taro farmer who is also politically conscious and politically active. Then it's this fusion of both really that promotes the most enduring or the most powerful philosophy that we should have in the. But I think that's part of the problem. People
I was going to say, what do you think is the block to that? Because it's a huge thing you're saying.
I think that's part of the block when in our own people who will tell me that. Let me give you another example. In 1998, I did a talk at the Iolani Palace. We were commemorating the 100 years of the Newlands Resolution.
Which, explain to people what the Newlands Resolution is.
Okay, so in 1898, this was the resolution that was passed by the United States Congress, which purported or claimed to annex the Hawaiian Islands for war necessity, basically.
Spanish-American
War.
Which itself was kind of this weird fraudulent thing.
But which if you understand again, although it's called the Treaty of Annexation, it's only a resolution. It is not a real treaty.
They just use the word.
Correct. Now, just to understand that, when people say, oh, yeah, treaty this, treaty, well, just be clear. Prior to that, we know that the Hawaiian Kingdom had 5 treaties with the United States. So we already had 5 in other, parts of history. 5. So it wasn't as if...
As a country.
The United States was just making up a treaty. No, they already had 5 real ones. Real ones in the sense that they went through the usual process under international law. It's when the executive branch negotiates, we sign off, we take it back, it's ratified in your own government, and then the final step is the exchange.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say I think people get confused because also American Indians use the word treaty. So white America already understood that. When they misuse language like that, so in comes brown Hawaiians and we're using the word treaty properly, right?
It's a very complex issue because I would not want to speak on behalf of American Indians to say that their treaty is any less. But we got to recognize process-wise, it's a little different. When we talk international treaties in the Hawaiian Kingdom, these were not domestic treaties under the authority of the United States Congress or plenary power of the United States Congress. These were international treaties that we also had, not just with the United States, but with countries all over the world. Now, what's important about that, that's what makes us different versus American Indians in regards to history, is that it's not just treaties with the U.S. Congress that we had, but we had treaties with all the great powers, of that time. And so we were, as people call, we were part of what's called the family of nations. We were part of the international community we had delegates and we had representatives and we had, throughout embassies throughout
like
the
80
world.
or 90?
Right, I think 90 legations and stuff throughout the world. And so we talk about treaties.
Well, this was a very international place as
well.
Correct.
Not just international, but we also realized that we had, we were respected as being what's called, having a neutral status amongst the family of nations, which meant, of course, that like Switzerland of today, we saw ourselves as being this kind of place where we weren't really going to take sides with the various wars that were going on in the 1800s. But I think it's important to remember that when we talk about sovereignty, historically, we all should know, everyone should know, in 1843, November 28, 1843, the Hawaiian Kingdom was recognized as a nation state by the Anglo-Franco Proclamation. That's England and France at that time, Great Britain, recognized Hawaii and basically said, hey, you're part of this so-called family of nations. Right. Now, what's important about that, as we always say, is that Hawaii really is the first non-European
non-Caucasian
state to be recognized. In other words, before India became India as a nation state, before there was Japan, before there was Argentina, and all these other countries, the Hawaiian Kingdom, these islands in the middle of the Pacific, was already recognized. So when people talk about Hawaiian independence or Hawaiian sovereignty, and they talk, oh, Hawaiians, you're trying to get sovereignty or you're trying to get independence, you can see the analysis is faulty because not having, it's a lack of understanding of history, that we already attained a nation state status. We already had attained sovereignty over these islands back in 1843 via these so-called treaty recognitions. So after 1843, we continued to have treaties with all the great powers of the world after that period.
And we had 5 with the United States. Since you were talking about a talk that you gave in 1998. I didn't mean to get you off topic.
Anyway, so I in recognition of that, I did a talk, and basically I spoke only in Hawaiian. And the purpose was to, have everybody remember part of our history that, for me, this is something I want everyone to kind of, when will be the day when all of our speeches will be all in Hawaiian again at Iolani Palace. And that's kind of what I talked about, was the fact that, I looked at it as being a step in the direction where I had hoped for one day where Hawaiian would be the language of Iolani Palace again, and in a political setting we would speak in this manner. Well, I got interviewed by a news reporter. The next day, the newspaper comes out, and I'm reading through the article, and interesting enough, the reporter interviews a teacher up at Kamehameha Schools, to be unnamed anyway. And sadly, this teacher tells the reporter, oh, you should never use Hawaiian language politically. That's not our way of our kupuna. So I read that and I say, well, it's so sad. Here's this person who teaches our kids
Hawaiian kids.
Hawaiian kids who speaks Hawaiian, yet did not even know their own history. They obviously never read Navahi, who wrote in Hawaiian and spoke in Hawaiian, Kalao Okalani, or Wilcox, or many of those great orators, Lili Okalani, who have you, who wrote very political words and made very political speeches in the Hawaiian language. So my point is, this is part of that kind of false consciousness that you think, again, it's not just about making Hawaiian sounds per se, but I want people to speak in Hawaiian, also understanding that being political is part of, I would say being political is part of the cultural
It's the norm.
Yeah. See, I think people they've been taught to somehow believe that being political is somehow separate from being cultural, or being cultural. I can do cultural stuff and not be political.
But I think they've been taught to be non-threatening. They've been
Right.
taught to be
Yeah,
polite,
right. That's
and
exactly.
if you have an argument or a heated discussion about politics or history, somehow that codes as threatening or disrespectful to people. And I think that's one of the most frustrating things, I think, in our process, our political discourse that's happening now, is it's okay to have these kinds of arguments. I think it's important to have them, but Hawaiians have gotten the message that...
And that's my point about education. That's why my point about when you understand, not that you just spoke Hawaiian. Hawaiians back then, Hawaiians spoke Hawaiian, but Hawaiians spoke eloquently and very political about what was going on. You start to recognize, whoa, it's at a higher level of understanding and consciousness now, because you haven't been limited by somehow this discourse that Hawaiian language guys, you over there, all your Hawaiian kingdom guys, you guys over there, those guys who dance hula, you over there, and it's kind of almost like this separate identities. Where the reality, as I keep on saying, for me, it's really one and the same.
Right.
We've been confused, we've been miseducated, we've been created, if you will, into an image which disempowers us.
Right.
By
Okay.
somehow believing that we are, I just speak Hawaiian. I don't get into the political stuff.
We're going to have to come back and do
Yeah.
a part two, because this went by so fast. Aloha Aina Oia I'o. Tell me what that means, and then we're going to come back for a part two.
Okay, Aloha Aina Oia I'o. Well, it's actually from a favorite mele of mine. They came from the
5
overflow
seconds.
period. Oh, wow.
What does it mean?
It's a Aloha Aina, the true patriot, a true lover of the land.
Okay, we're going to come back and talk
Okay.
about that. Mahalo nui, and we'll be back for part two with Kaleikoa Kaeo. Ahui ho.
What is a true Hawaiian? What's a true Hawaiian? What is a true Hawaiian?
Aloha.
Tell me what's a true Hawaiian? Can you conceive the concept created in my brain? Apologies accepted, but the grudge remains as I strain to ease the pain that my people feel, while other people say it's no big deal. Charge one, grand larceny. Uncle Sam better wash his hands because they're filthy. He did the dirty deed, can't you see it's hurting me? So I live my life day by day, keep asserting myself so that I may reach my full potential.